Believable story of the daring Danakil tribesmen, a race that live in the volcanic region of Ethiopia, a land as alien as any on this earth.
There is something which sets this man apart from the rest of the crowd as he walks along the streets of central London. The ramrod straight back suggests a military background. Certainly there is something in the features which might indicate that he has often felt harsher climes than those of London streets. The formal uniform of bowler hat and polished shoes reveals only a small part of this exceptional man's life. His name is Wilfred Thesiger. His explorations have become a legend. In 1934, one particular exploration took him among some of the most isolated and savage people on Earth. Up to 60 years ago, the Danakil Desert and the Afar people remained largely unknown. We're going to follow in the footsteps of Thesiger's journey. This is a film record of the way the Afar people used to live before the 20th century overtook them. London is home to Thesiger for only 3 months of the year. 39 years after his momentous journey, he still seeks out the world's loneliest places. He turns into the Traveller's Club to plan new journeys, or sometimes to recall the greatest and most hazardous journey of them all in the Danakil Desert. Ethiopia, a land of high plateaus and rugged mountains dropping to burning desert towards the Red Sea coast, the Danakil Desert. The Danakil country of the Afar lies at the southern end of the Red Sea. It's a relentless land, and it's hard to imagine how anyone could live there. This is a land created by fire from the bowels of the earth. In places, it is pockmarked by craters and mounds of yellow sulfur. The 100 square miles of the Danakil receive little regular rain, and parts are still volcanically active. Three rift valleys meet in the Danakil region, giving vent to huge volcanoes. Why should any outsider wish to cross such a place on foot? As far as Thesiger was concerned, it wasn't the forbidding terrain that was the major hazard. The men who lived by this smoking cauldron and took their harsh nature from it were the real danger to the traveller. Castration and death were the fates the Danakil afar kept for intruders. Thesiger was only 23 when he ventured into Danakil country, young enough possibly to disregard the risks.
Yes, I think this is sort of overridden by the excitement of getting down there. I mean, I don't think one dwelt on this. Getting down into the Danakil countries was something which I'd longed to do. There was a fair chance. I mean, when we were camped, I wasn't surrounded by 40 armed men all the time. Most of the time I was pushing off into the bush with a couple of trackers, shooting animals, partly for meat and partly because I was collecting heads at that time. And of course, under those circumstances, you were a gift to any Danakil. If you went down into the Danakil country, you were very unlikely to come back. And if you did come back, you'd probably be missing some of your more vital organs.
His starting point was the capital of Ethiopia, Addis Ababa. His objective, a river, the strangely named Awash. The Awash was known to flow into the Danakil desert and then simply disappear. Thesiger was determined to find out where the river went. The Awash plunges down 10,000 feet from the Ethiopian highlands. By the time it reaches the Danakil desert, it's a large and powerful river. Where does all this water go? The river never reaches the Red Sea coast. It's incredible to think that as late as 1934, this great river still waited to be placed upon the map of Africa. To get it there was a tempting, if daunting, task, even for a young man of Thesiger's adventurous spirit. He wasn't the first European to try it. During the previous 100 years, 3 large expeditions, one armed with cannon, had tried to force their way into the area with a view to conquering it and also to follow the Awash to its unknown end, only to meet their own. It wasn't the terrain along its banks that kept the river secret. Compared with the rest of the Danakil region, this is almost easy going. The river remained unexplored for one reason only, the Afar themselves. They massacred any foreigner who came near it. 40 years later, Thesiger recalls his motives for going.
Well, to find out what had happened to it, where it ended. And this was you would say this was the excuse for going down there.
The young Thesiger of early explorations. Now he recaptured how it felt to be the first European there.
Well, it wasn't so much when I saw the point at which the river emerged. It was when I first got down onto the edge of Ausa and climbed up a peak there and then looked down on the forests and the lakes that lay ahead of me. And one country which, as far as I know, a European hadn't seen before.
The lakes and forests of the Danakil region of Ausa are confined to the river's course. All round stretches the Danakil desert. You would imagine that nothing could survive there. The few animals that do live here subsist on desert plants. How can people survive here without water? On the grey lava plains, only vultures gain from the deaths the merciless sun leaves behind. This unique film record was made before the old order of society disintegrated, when this sun-scorched land of sand and lava desert was home to perhaps 150,000 semi-nomadic Afar people. These three warriors have walked many miles for one reason only, the best reason for doing anything in the Danakil, to find water. It's by no means pure. The small water hole lies at the bottom of an extinct crater. It tastes and stinks of sulfur. He pours it over his body so that it runs back into the hole again for others to use. The Afar, like all pastoralist peoples, seldom own their land, but they do guard their water holes to the death. The clan who dug this water hole had absolute ownership of it, and other clans use it at their peril. This absolute ownership of water is a fundamental of life. The Afar pastoralist's livelihood is their livestock, and it's in numbers of livestock that an Afar measures his wealth. By and large, they choose animals which need little water. Camels need water just twice a week. Families herd their stock together. Towards their own close relations, the Afar are as fiercely loyal as they are aggressive towards intruders. The greeting shows the closeness of family ties. Guards watch over the clan's stock. The Afar are divided into many bitterly opposed factions, and murder and ambush are easy and even half expected at moments like this. When it comes to drinking, camels usually get priority over humans. Even children have to wait while the camels drink. A trough has been specially formed out of mud and lava blocks. They soon empty it, and water has to be handed up with great effort in leather buckets until all the livestock has drunk its fill. Herding their stock and lifting up water for them is the only work an Afar man will willingly take on. If the Afar will murder to protect one muddy water supply, it's easy to imagine how they regard the Awash River and its narrow band of fertile soil along its banks. For the Afar, who are lucky enough to live there, it's a paradise which any outsider must be prevented from seeing, let alone sharing. The Awash is the absolute and central lifeline of the Afar people, and their only oasis in times of drought. Down the ages, their answer has been to kill intruders. The Afar's ancestry owes more to Arabia than Africa. It was the 13th century Arab geographer Ibn Said who first mentioned the word Danakil to describe this race, and Thesiger himself uses the term. But the people prefer to call themselves Afar. In their language, Afar means the best, or the first. The men are never without a rifle, or spear, or both, even while herding, and they don't just carry them for show. There had been a violent battle with the neighbors close to this very spot not many days before this scene was filmed. Until 100 years ago, the Afar would sometimes sacrifice a camel before a battle to a sky god that they worshipped. But the majority of the Afar are followers of Islam. Warthog is forbidden pig flesh, but when one breaks through the herds, it does so in peril of its life. The Afar rifles, often out of date and possibly even more deadly to owner than intended victim, are the universal weapons. But the weapon most feared is the curved knife, or gile, which the Afar carries at his belt. Thesiger knew its lethal purpose before he set out on his journey of discovery.
Yes, well, this is the knife which all the Danakil who warriors, however young they may be counted as warriors, have. And you can see that it's a fairly formidable weapon. Now you don't cut with it like that, you cut with it like this.
The smiths who make the traditional Danakil knives are craftsmen, even though their methods appear very basic. Some of the metal they use still comes from railway lines and bridges built by the Italians during their conquest of Abyssinia, as it was called in the 30s. They never conquered the Danakil, and their steel was turned against them, to the horror of many of Mussolini's invading soldiers. The shape and pattern of the ghillie probably hasn't changed in 500 years. Every boy who has been initiated at the age of 14 will be given one of these weapons by his father. The one section of society that doesn't follow these Afar traditions are the smiths themselves. As with many pastoralists, smiths are often outcasts from society and don't intermarry with the Afar. The curved blade is razor sharp on both sides. Did the threat of the long knives deter Thesiger as he pressed deeper and deeper into Danakil country in his search for the end of the Arwash River?
I remember the day we got into Bahadu, and the whole place was humming like a sort of disturbed bee's nest. And we were fairly, I didn't say certain, but we thought we probably should be attacked that night or in the early morning. I don't remember it was actually fear that one felt. It was sort of perhaps more excitement.
Thesiger had to pass through the fiercely guarded area of Bahadu to follow the Arwash River's unmapped course. The Afar in Bahadu were almost always at war, and every inch of Thesiger's way was a potential death trap.
The Danakil are divided into two groups, the Asa Emra and the Ada Emra. And the Asa Emra are the sort of dominant tribe, a dominant tribe. And they were halfway down the Hawash under a mountain called Ayelu. And that was probably because the most dangerous area, because though they were also Asa Emra in Ausa, there they were under the control of the Sultan.
This rich land is the Sultanate of Ausa, the jealously guarded domain of the Sultan. The Sultan's capital is situated on top of a lava cliff above the Arwash River. It's called Asaita. Its streets are naked lava flows. A stranger here must seek the Sultan's safe conduct. Our cameraman Dieter Plager found he certainly needed it. The Sultan's household troops, his hand-picked bodyguards. The Sultan himself, absolute ruler of almost 2/3 of the Afar people. The Sultan's word is law throughout the length and breadth of Ausa. It's a feudal system, but a stable one. The bodyguard is composed of his relatives, men therefore whom he can trust with his life. Apart from the Sultan's modest palace, Asaita possesses only one public building of consequence, the mosque. On the balcony of the minaret, the muezzin calls the faithful to prayer. But first, a respectful washing of feet. Fighting and herding sticks are usually left outside along with the tribesmen's sandals. On market day in Asaita, fighting sticks are permitted, but not rifles. Knives are carried too. No Afar could be persuaded to lay them aside. The clinking tin is a measure to weigh corn. The women bring their produce too. They may have walked 20 miles from the desert with their menfolk. This man is hoping to trade some ghee, goat's milk butter. A heavy load of mats and skins. Goat skins are a prime commodity as water containers. The capital does have one feature of which any modern city planner might approve, a marketplace of truly noble proportions. An Afar chains his camel, to its obvious distaste. Knowing the explosive nature of the Afar, this is a remarkably peaceful scene. All his subjects know that here they're under the Sultan's eye. For causing a disturbance, a man could get his hair shaved off with a blunt knife. A thief has been known to have his hand lopped off at the wrist. Tough justice, but for a tough people. Dieter Plager's camera was hidden in the window of a house to shoot these scenes. The Afar men hate cameras and would certainly have turned violent if they had known that their women were being photographed. Married girls wear a black headcloth, which they sometimes use to cover their breasts. Girls are usually married by 14 years of age. Although marriage to a cousin is expected, if another man wants to step into his place, he will have to pay a large compensation. If he doesn't pay, he runs the risk of losing his life. This young Afar wife is probably no more than 15, but she already has a well-trained eye for items to buy or barter for her family. Another reflection of the gentler side of the Afar nature, the charming habit of the kinsfolk kissing hands. After the enforced good behavior of market day in Asaita, there's a need to blow off steam. Apart from riding, the game of Koso is the Afar's only organized sport. It sometimes takes several hours to get warmed up. Now, as can be judged from its gentle nature, the game has only just begun. It consists of two fiercely opposed sides. A hard leather ball is thrown in, and the object is to grab the ball and fight your way free of the scrum and touch it against your thigh while throwing it back between your legs. These complex rules are unique to the Afar. This is how a point is scored in Koso. Tempers run high, and men have been killed in the Koso game. It's not unknown for the Sultan's bodyguard to wade in with whips at the close of play to separate the contestants. For most of the Afar in the Danakil, a game of Koso helps to while away the time between herding and raiding. Thesiger sees the Koso game as an expression of the Danakil's free nature.
I've always liked pastoral and nomadic people. And then, as I say, I found them, despite their reputation, extraordinarily attractive people. They were friendly and nice-looking. They're not under the stresses and strains of modern life, for one thing. My recollection of them, though they were under the sort of strain of being jumped at any time if they were walking about in the bush, or being attacked while they were in their encampments at night or in the early morning. Was one of the laughing, happy people who were cheerful. I found the same in the desert, among the Bedou, who lived really on the sort of knife edge of survival. But the memory I carry away is of a happy people, not depressed and gloomy and apprehensive.
The harsh Danakil desert has been home to the Afar people for nearly 10 centuries. During this time, they have evolved a lifestyle and customs to withstand the trials the desert brings. Over the last 20 years, their way of life has been considerably changed by modern developments. For defensive purposes, and also because there's grass nearby, several closely related families, called Kidos, band together to herd their goats. Frequently the children, who share the herding, remain close friends for life. Loyalty to one's own Kido begins early. In the times of hardship that the desert brings, loyalty means survival. Every individual is expected to share his livestock in an emergency. In fact, an Afar is almost incapable of refusing one of his relatives. Towns of Africa, one seldom sees children apparently carefree and playing together. It's very noticeable that the children among pastoralist peoples like the Afar, no matter how hard their life, seem to get fun out of childhood, even when they're herding stock or making goat's milk butter. The basic unit of the Afar group is a homestead. The wife and mother is in complete charge of the homestead, although the senior man heads the hamlet or group of homes. A wife does all the domestic work while the men contribute virtually nothing to the effort. She makes the ghee, the goat's milk butter, which is also used as a dressing for the hair, and she will do all the buying and bartering of camels and their livestock. The young, unmarried girls do most of the everyday chores. As a rule, they're betrothed to a close cousin, preferably their uncle's son. This arrangement would seem to encourage inbreeding, but in fact it helps to ensure family unity in an otherwise highly fragile society, and is a common practice among desert people. When this young girl marries in a year or so's time, her cousin will not be required to pay any significant bride wealth of livestock, as happens in so many other tribes in Africa. In the harsh Danakil desert, it's not really possible to accumulate livestock or any wealth. When an Afar girl gets married, there's quite a celebration. A Danakil man can have more than one wife. Adultery is frowned upon, but it's not regarded as a serious crime. The punishment for persistent adultery is to tie the culprit up into a ball and hurl him into the Awash River. Only when he seems close to drowning is he hauled to safety. The Danakil, who live close to the river, are quite unafraid of the water, even though it's deep and there is a powerful current. There are also crocodiles. The tribesmen and their domestic animals seem to suffer very few casualties, perhaps because there are a great many catfish in the river, which the crocodiles find easier to catch. Like all desert pastoralists, the Afar lead a locust way of life. They move their stock with the seasons in a fairly well-established pattern. When and where to move is one of the very few communal decisions the Afar make. Everyone must agree with this communal decision to enable the whole extended family to stay together. They make their camp seemingly in the middle of nowhere. Building a home for a night or a month is almost as easy as pitching a tent. The mats, which are one of the few things the Afar make for themselves, are quickly unrolled over a framework of bent sticks. It all takes about 5 minutes to put up. A nursery to protect the youngest children from the burning sun is built from the same materials. These young warriors are part of a protective group known as the FEMA, which will fight on the clan's behalf against others and maintain a semblance of order at home. They're the only cohesive force in a vast desert of pastoralist anarchy. When not actively fighting or watering their stock, the young warriors pass their time lazily. They consider themselves an elite for whom any sort of physically demanding work is unthinkable. Hair and war are their main preoccupations. Their staple diet is milk from the camel, and they like to drink it as cold as possible. The cup is woven from specially selected palm fronds so that it cools quickly through evaporation, even in the blistering heat. They seldom touch meat, except at a feast, after a marriage, or perhaps after a battle. These men carry no rifles, but only because they're deep inside their own clan territory and don't expect to be surprised. This group has been on a raid for trophies against its enemy, the Isa. The man drinking wears a black ostrich feather in his hair, a sign that he has recently killed his first opponent in a raid. Being Muslims, the Afar never touch alcohol. Their warlike nature needs no artificial stimulus beyond the wild chanting, called kasso, in which they insult their enemies and which often precedes a raid. Wilfred Thesiger was a first-hand witness of one such raid and its results.
I arrived in a village, and the headman of the village had just died, and his son had taken over from him. And he'd only killed one man, and therefore he had virtually no sort of standing, didn't count really as a warrior. And he'd just gone down towards the Isa territory. And the day I arrived there, he just got back, and he'd shot 3 Isa down there. And it was a tremendous feast and celebrations. And I got a rather nice photograph. He was a nice lad. And then I stayed there, and I left there about after about 4 or 5 days. And the night after I think it was the day after we left, they came across from the other side of the river, wiped his village out, killed him and every single person in it. Another section of another Danakil tribe from the other side of the river. I mean, one was surrounded by this sort of thing. You had no status in the Danakil country unless you had killed. Couldn't marry. Well, no girl would have accepted you. All the decorations which you wore on your knives and the bracelets and the feathers and the things you scratched your head with, each had a significance. And I'd reached the stage when I could look at the man and say, well, 7. This is here, you look at somebody wearing campaign medals and see that he'd been in Burma or in the Middle East. And then when they were dead, they put up the monuments to the dead, and in front of these monuments you had the upright stones, one for each man he killed. You sometimes saw a monument with as many as 17 or 18 stones. And that was some really famous warrior. And then again, it didn't matter. You didn't have to challenge the man to fair fight. And if you could get up behind him and shoot him in the back while he was walking along a track, it was perfectly fair. You got the trophies which you wanted. And I don't see quite why one should laugh at that if you are, because if you're shooting lion or elephant or buffalo, you don't sort of attract the attention of the lion or the buffalo. You do everything you can not to. If you can get up behind and shoot it in the shoulder when it's not looking, you do so, and then you go off with its head or its skin.
A party of Afar sets out across the desert to a waterhole. Invariably, that is where the ambush takes place. It's even half expected. Warfare is fundamental to Afar society in their struggle to control the scanty water resources of the desert. On the lava ridges above the distant waterhole, men armed with rifles that once served in a dozen armies sit and wait. Today, it's only in one or two very remote areas that these bloody vendettas continue. Due to the intervention of successive governments over the last 20 years, the Afar have gradually lost the elements of their culture centering around the killing of enemies and strangers. But there is one group of Afar to the north of Asaita whose days have never been spent in the idleness of a warrior existence. They live and work in one of the most terrible places on earth. Lake Karun, in the center of the Danakil Depression, is nearly 4,000 feet below sea level, one of the lowest places in the world. Millions of years ago, it was part of the Red Sea until vast upheavals of the earth isolated it. The sea evaporated, leaving behind a block of salt. The salt caravans, which make a 4-day journey down into this inferno from the high, cool plateau of Ethiopia, avoid the fearful heat by traveling at night. But the Afar salt miners live and work in this heat all their lives. When Thesiger travelled across the Danakil in 1934, salt blocks were used as currency. In those days, the workers would have been literally mining money, and many of the Afar were very well off. Today, they receive just one loaf of bread, a goat skin of water, and a small payment per day. The caravans which come down to collect the salt bring this payment with them, including the water. The camels are loaded in preparation for the arduous journey to market in the highlands. Each camel is stretched to its limit on the long climb back onto the plateau. Precious as they are, many camels collapse under their loads of salt blocks and die by the wayside. On its journey to the distant mountains, the caravan will cross much the same awful terrain that Thesiger saw for the first time as he neared the point at which the mysterious Awash River vanished from the map. How did he feel after so many hardships and dangers as his goal came into sight?
There was a sense of achievement, and I think it was very much added to by my youth. I mean, in fact, I was only about 23 at the time. I think if I'd been 40 or 45, I probably shouldn't have had such an my feelings wouldn't have been so extreme. I don't know, it was perhaps the most thrilling moment of my life, or one of them.
He had reached a point where the river ran more slowly and started to break up into many channels. The air was heavy and smelt of soda. Now he could begin to guess what lay ahead. The Arwash River ended in a huge shimmering sheet of water, still 80 miles from the sea. At last, the mapmakers of the world would know for certain what happened to that river. It simply bled to death in the Danakil desert in a huge lake called Abay. The waters of the lake are sucked up into the sky as fast as the Arwash River delivers them. Only flocks of flamingos live in the soda waters. Even if the river didn't make it to the coast, Thesiger and his men still had to find a way out to safety with the news of their discovery.
Hard bit, as I found, was when we ultimately got to the end of the river, or to the lake where it ended, and then had to cut across the lava deserts to the coast. And there, if I remember right, I had 24 camels when we left the lake, and I think lost 18 of them on the way from starvation. There's nothing for them to eat.
40 years had passed since Thesiger made that terrible journey. In that time, the world's wild places were becoming increasingly accessible. Isolated peoples were coming more and more into close contact with the modern world. Did he believe that the world of the Afar was shrinking?
Oh yes, it's not only shrinking, it shrunk, and as far as I think the cultures and civilizations, if you like, which have gone on now for thousands of years, are disappearing like sort of snow on the lawn in a hot sun.
For centuries, the Afar have defended their harsh land against intruders. But now the Ethiopian government has succeeded in integrating the fiercely independent Afar into the Ethiopian nation. For future generations, the days of the Afar warrior will be just a legend. But this man was at least able to bear witness to that vanished way of life.
We take a look at the humble wood pigeon in beastly Britain tomorrow evening at 7:30.